Okay. Good morning, everyone. You can do better. Good morning. Great. Great start, guys. Now that we have finally declared the 15th edition of the International Youth Conference in Kruševo open, it is time to start working and discussing all these exciting topics that are ahead of us. But before that, I bet that all of you have already had a chance to grasp the beautiful fresh air here in Kruševo during last night, where you probably dreamt big while you were sleeping. But now, today, you will dream even bigger, because we're starting with a very important, very crucial topic to discuss early this morning, and it is namely the future of the Southeastern Europe region in focus. And as the majority of you probably know, our region has been in the focus of great powers and empires for most of its history. But today, it is high time that the Southeastern Europe, that the Western Balkans, are finally in focus of you, the young people. It is finally time to ask ourselves the question: what type of region do we all want to live in? What type of region do we all want to participate actively in shaping? And before we get a chance to discuss this question between ourselves later in the workshops, today it is an immense pleasure to have three very, very distinguished speakers here on my left side, and each and every one of them will contribute to your fruitful work later in the afternoon. Each and every one of them will have 10 to 15 minutes to speak, and then of course you would gladly be welcome to join in a Q&A session. So listen carefully to them. Formulate your questions that you would like to ask later and engage in a dialogue. And most important of all, do not forget that this conference is not only about all 60 people here in this room. It is also important for those who are outside, who are further away, who have not had a chance to be here with you. Let's build a bridge between us and them by using social media, and by not forgetting to Facebook and tweet, and most important of all, as my fellow colleague Nemanja Živković has asked me to, should you Facebook or tweet, please use the hashtag IYCKR 2017. IYC, International Youth Conference, KR, Kruševo 2017. Right. Without further ado, as I already mentioned, there is a question waiting to find its answer for us. And the question is, what kind of region do we want to have? What kind of Southeastern Europe do we want to live in? And it's an immense pleasure to first have the chance to pose this question to Professor Tvrtko Jakovina from the University of Zagreb, who will have the chance to make his introduction to you right now. Professor Jakovina, please, you have the floor.
All participants and people who are going to speak after me. As you can see, I was not supposed to be the first one, but maybe it makes sense in a way. I'm not an active politician. I'm not an active diplomat. I'm not bound or connected with any government or governmental option in my country. Therefore, I might be a little bit less diplomatic, I guess. So do not be offended if I'm going to mention some of the countries people in the audience are coming from. I'll say quite a few words about Croatia. And I might maybe in a way set a tone for this morning, therefore. First of all, we mentioned, or you mentioned, Western Balkans and Southeastern Europe, and some people yesterday were talking about the Balkans. If you go to Encyclopedia Britannica, then Moldova would be also considered as part of the Balkans or Southeastern Europe. And the big question is Cyprus part of Southeastern Europe or Europe in general? Turkey still, or was it a couple of years ago? And finally, how do you treat, or where do you put Slovenia and Croatia, especially Croatia, after joining the European Union? Is it part of the Northern Balkans, as Team Judah said, which would leave us with Western Balkans, other countries of Southeastern Europe that are not members of the European Union, and then Romania, Bulgaria, and maybe Greece, that for many, many decades, I would say, was not considered as part of the Balkans, or at least Greeks were not thinking about themselves in that way. Maybe not so over the last, after the last crisis, but these are the problems. And these are the differences. There are some differences and there are some reasons for this. What kind of Europe or Southeastern Europe do we want? From my Croatian experience, and that might be especially important for all of you coming from Montenegro, who might be more impatient than the others that are a little bit further from European integrations. This is the best time now, once you are on the right track and trying to achieve European values, trying to show that things are moving in the positive direction, trying to present to people in Brussels or in Berlin or in other parts of in other capitals of important and influential European countries, that things are changing in your respective countries. Croatia has been there, and now when I look at that period, that was probably the most optimistic part of Croatian history over the last 25 years. Once you are in, you can be wrong, but you are part of the club. So maybe the club should change certain rules. If you ask me, there are few countries in European Union that do not obey the major or the basic values of European integrations, in Central Europe especially. And unfortunately, in my opinion, Brussels is not strong enough to be firm enough and say that you cannot behave that way. Croatia was almost there 1 year ago. It's not there anymore, although there are many problems. Some other countries have most developed European countries that are represented here. I teach in Italy. I could maybe talk a little bit about that, although Italy is part of still G7, I guess, and definitely one of the most important European countries. But also, I do not think that it is fair when Western companies are selling second-rate goods for the price of the first-rate goods in the poorest of European countries. And if you go to some of, let's say, German companies that are present on our markets, that's exactly what they do. That's also not good, And obeying or following European rules in Western countries and following, quote unquote, the Balkan rules in the Balkans is not in the spirit of European values, and in my opinion, those things should not be, shouldn't continue in that way. Europe a year ago was in deep crisis. You know that we were all talking about the danger of the Dutch elections and the possibility to have a populist in the presidential palace in France. We are still a little bit worried, but not so much after the French elections, how the Italian parliamentary elections will be next year. With Germany, it's a little bit easier. Whoever wins those elections, that's going to be fine. But we are still facing a populist regimes in so many parts of Europe. And in so many countries all around Europe, and especially in this region, Very many people vote for those options, and very many young people vote for those options. To be young doesn't mean that you are progressive, doesn't mean that you are liberal, doesn't mean that you are more open to the world and less xenophobic than your parents were, for instance. You have to work on that, and you have to maybe socialize with people from other nations and from other parts of the world, and this might be one of the ways how to do it. But keep that in mind. Also, small countries, and world is made of small countries. There are more than 80, the ambassador will probably know, 80-something countries, members of the United Nations, with less than 5 million people. Small countries are not big movers, but small countries can be enormous problems or cause enormous problems. Just look at the smallest of all Middle Eastern countries, Lebanon. You have a country that's maybe not as relevant as Egypt, but it's a huge problem, and it influences events in positive or mostly, unfortunately, negative way, in spite of a small size. At the same time, when you are coming from a small nation, and we are basically all coming from small countries with the exception maybe of Italy and Germany, if we are talking about people in this room, being small, as first Czechoslovak president Tomáš Masaryk said once, a lion remains lion in a zoo. And he's not being turned into a donkey if he's imprisoned. That's probably something that all people from small countries should keep in mind, And then your achievements are even more admirable if you manage to achieve something big coming from a small country, coming from an environment that is less encouraging than when you have things in better order than most of us have. I will say a couple of words about critical education and education in general, and I will wind my discussion up with that. In 2005, Croatian Ministry of Science, during those years when we were trying to present ourselves to Brussels, ordered the so-called supplement for the newest history to Croatian history textbooks. The idea was that after the successful peaceful reintegration of Eastern Slavonia, a part of Croatia that became fully integrated into Croatian territory, and that was the only successful UN mission of that kind ever, that we are mature enough to produce textbooks that are going to present the same narrative on the last war, the war of the 90s, the war that's sometimes in Croatia known as the Homeland War, to all pupils, regardless of their nationality. And the text was produced, but then an eruption, pandemonium started, and the ministry decided not to do that in the way as it was envisaged. 12 years later, we are at the very same spot where we were in 2005. At the same time, we have done nothing to improve our education in general, to make it more critical. And when you make education more critical, more open, more open for debate, then you create citizens who can think and who can maybe vote in a different way, or maybe ask questions that are normally not being asked in a societies that are deeply penetrated with nationalism and also obsession with the past. I could start with countries that are probably the least touched with that. Of former Yugoslav republics, I would say Montenegro may be in the best position. But if you go to other countries, you would see that obsession with the past and recreation of narratives that are sometimes so impossible, untrue, ridiculous, exist in so many places that are not improving not only conditions of the population, but creating unnecessary differences between other nations around or other neighboring, between neighboring countries. Critical education, in my opinion, can help students to ask the right questions, ask the second question, judge, and if we achieve that, and that should be probably one of the goals for the Europe of the future. If we do not do that, if you do not achieve that, if we do not achieve that goal, it's going to be relatively simple. This city and this country, as well as Serbia, Croatia, Moldova, and many others, will continue to lose young population that is leaving never to return. It's enough to walk around some of the cities at night, and you can see not only how cities are empty, but how many windows are closed and dark. And we will have different type of Europe that's not going to actually be a happy home for the Europeans. Well, how can we achieve that? Maybe that's the answer, that's the question for those who are in power or participating in government to give some of the answers. What I can say for you, as an advice, try to follow those values wherever you work, wherever you are, at whatever position you held. Try to show that your job matters, even if you do the least ambitious thing. With that approach, I guess that we might maybe change things in your local community, and then on the state level or on the regional level, if you wish. So try to be that lion from the Masaryk sentence, no matter where you are and no matter what you do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Iakovina, for your insightful speech. And indeed, values empower more than actual titles and positions in government. Values empower citizens. Citizens who need to learn how to speak straightforward, direct, and pose the critical questions that we need to ask those responsible. But each and every one of us is responsible, and these are some of the most important points that I took from Professor Iakovina's speech. Indeed, it is the point of our conference to be straightforward, to be direct, and to keep on asking questions. Right, and since we need to bring some balance, after the more academic and critical perspective that Professor Iakovina offered, now we will have the chance to move on with someone who you already had the pleasure to meet last night, someone who you had the pleasure to listen to during our ceremony. It's a great pleasure to introduce you once again to Mr. Christian Gayoso from the Federal German Foreign Office. Mr. Gayoso, the floor is yours.
Well, good morning to all of you. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. And in contrary to the professor here to my left side, I am an active diplomat and I am bound by the position of my government. And having that in mind, This time I won't spare you, and I will read to you what I have prepared. Yesterday I didn't do that when I said hello to you and greeted you. This time I will do that. And you will notice that it is things that I have to present to you resemble very much the position of an official, of a government official, but nevertheless, after that I think we can enter into a discussion and maybe vary a little bit from that. But unfortunately, I have to tell you now already that I have to leave at 10:30 sharp in order to catch my plane in Skopje back to Berlin. So I'm sorry when I have to leave in the middle of the discussion, but unfortunately it's not possible in any other way. So, the topic of our panel is the future of Southeastern Europe in focus. For us, for Germany, this future perspective is clear. It is the EU membership of the Western Balkan 6. We focus, or I will focus myself on, when I talk about Southeastern Europe, especially on what we can do regarding those countries who are not yet members of the European Union, that is Serbia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Kosovo, Albania, Macedonia and Montenegro. I would like to share with you a few thoughts about what we think are the trends in the Western Balkans, many of them worrying ones, and also what we think we can do to reverse those trends. Tensions within and between the region's countries have increased. We see that the political divisions within societies contribute to more confrontational regional politics, and vice versa. The demons of nationalism and of ethnic divisions that seemed to have been overcome already seem to be partly re-emerging. If we look closely at what is causing these developments, we come to the conclusion that many problems are homegrown. Democratic shortcomings, reform gridlock, corruption, economic stagnation and political instability. However, we must also recognize that countries from outside the region try to re-establish spheres of influence through old geopolitical thinking. Thereby, they pit neighbors against each other and also against the European Union. This asks for an unequivocally clear response from us, but also from the Western Balkan states. Germany remains committed to the European perspective of all countries in the Western Balkans. Ultimately, we want to see the Western Balkans 6 with us inside the European Union. Full EU membership for all 6 of them is our final goal. We think that a firm EU rapprochement and everything that comes with it is the answer to the challenges I just laid out. We are convinced that a credible and effective enlargement policy is a driver for reforms in the region that are in our common interest. It helps promote stability, democracy, rule of law, freedom of speech, and prosperity. In our immediate neighborhood, we need and we want countries that are stable, peaceful, democratic, and oriented towards the EU. This is why the EU will remain oriented towards the Western Balkans too. This is our very self-centered interest in enlargement. I think that's a very important point to make that clear, that sometimes we are asked, as Germany or as other member states, why, especially from our own people at home, why are we interested in EU enlargement? Why do we want the Western Balkans in the European Union? And there are many reasons. I pointed out some of them, but a very important reason is our self-centered interest. So, and from this self-centered interest, you can be sure that the EU perspective is credible. If you don't believe anything else I said, then believe in this realism in international politics, that it is self-centered interest that is also driving us to that perspective. It is crucial to understand that reforms the Western Balkan 6 need to undertake are not about the EU, they are about the countries themselves. Those reforms do certainly involve hardships, especially the economic ones, and they are certainly not always popular. But those conditions and reforms are not some hardship invented by bureaucrats to make life in the Balkans more difficult. On the contrary, They are intended to help accession candidates to stand on their own feet and become fit for Europe, for the common market and for the global economy in general. And they are not at all limited to the economic sphere, because the EU is first and foremost a value-based community. Tolerance, pluralism, non-discrimination, democracy, freedom of speech and media, and the rule of law are core values of the EU. That is why those values are also at the heart of the EU accession process. For example, with the chapters 23 and 24, who focus expressively on those issues. And I cannot stress enough that the EU has always been a peace project. For more than 6 decades now, the EU and its predecessors have solved all differences through dialogue and compromise. This is the fundamental pillar of European integration. After World War II, it was imperative to guarantee that such a catastrophe was never going to happen again. And the Western Balkans also have a vivid memory of the terror that comes with war, and will therefore understand very well what an invaluable achievement a long-lasting, stable peace order is. But peace is more than just the absence of war. Peace also means an atmosphere of trust and good neighborly relations between the countries of Europe. This too is in the very heart of the project of European integration. We have overcome the specter of war and mistrust between countries like France and Germany, or Germany and Poland. The European perspective will help the nations of the Western Balkans to reach a new level of mutual understanding and cooperation. This is what Europe is really about, and this is why the European Union will not be complete without stable, prospering Western Balkan countries. But EU rapprochement also needs to be the strategic aim of candidate countries, not one of several. We expect a true commitment of political elites to the often hard reform process that is needed to achieve a development level that makes room for accession negotiations and implementation of agreements. The process itself is challenging and takes a long time. The benefits have so far been barely visible for the populations. On the contrary, many people are primarily confronted with the social hardships that are a consequence of implementing long-needed reforms in the candidate countries. It is often the elderly and underprivileged who suffer the most from this, but also the younger generations. The employment statistics show a clear picture. You just mentioned it. Youth unemployment is sometimes over 60%. This means that young people barely have a chance of finding a suitable job in the domestic labor market. One of the consequences is that many of those people who have the opportunity vote with their feet and just leave. Young and well-educated people in particular are leaving the region in great numbers. This, of course, is the group of people most needed to build sustainable economies and societies. On another level, the pro-EU choice of Western Balkan 6 countries also needs to be reflected in the degree to which countries, for example, align themselves with the common foreign and security policy of the EU. We don't expect any nation to cut historically friendly relations with any other country, not with Russia, not with China, not with Turkey or others. Why would we when we ourselves are trying to work continuously with them and improve our relation with them? But we need progressive alignment with the EU's foreign policy positions. We want to see real democracies on the Western Balkans with fundamental freedoms guaranteed, vivid NGOs, free press, freedom of speech and media, etc. We don't favor stability over democracy, not only because of moral reasons, but also because it's simply not sustainable. The German government thinks that the European Union's enlargement process must be enhanced and given additional support, especially to soften the hardship of reforms in so many countries. That does not mean compromise in the conditions for membership. There will be no discounts, particularly in relation to the rule of law, the justice system, the fight against corruption and press of freedom. As President Juncker said on Wednesday in the European Parliament, quote, "The rule of law is not optional in the European Union, it is a must. Our union is not a state, but it is a community of law," unquote. We must make sure that the extensive support that is a task for us, that the extensive support that the European Union already provides for the Western Balkan countries becomes more visible in those countries. Because sometimes if you go, for example, to Serbia and talk to people, especially in rural areas, you notice that they are of the opinion that Russia is the country who gives most aid to the country and helps to build schools and roads and whatever. And you're really astonished by that when you know that what they offer is many things, but not the things we try to bring to Serbia. We, the German government, believe that now the time has come to focus on clear, practical projects of cooperation. We need to provide more financial means and allow the Western Balkan countries to participate in more of the European Union's programs. We want to strengthen regional integration, regional cooperation. We are pleased with the positive dynamics that the Berlin process has created. Some of you may know the Berlin process, this regular process of conferences held at the top level. But we think that the results of this process needs to become more tangible. We also want to accelerate the large infrastructure projects that are economically vital, projects that have special symbolic significance, such as the highway between Serbia, Kosovo and Albania. And in order to finance it, Minister Gabriel, our foreign minister, proposed to set up an additional fund for infrastructure projects. Another idea our minister presented a few weeks ago was to hold an IT summit in the region to promote an efficient IT infrastructure and a reliable legal framework for IT services. He also advocated to establish a fund for the countries of the region to finance projects in the area of dual vocational training to tackle youth unemployment and promote growth. But we all know that investors are less likely to invest if they feel the rule of law is not taken seriously. So there is also a strong economic argument to strengthen independent institutions, parliaments, justice sector, and to protect the independence of freedom of the media. We are aware that all these things cost money, but if we don't make money available today to keep the Western Balkans on the right track during this crucial phase, the consequence will be a lot more expensive for all of us. But ultimately, it is in the region's responsibility to make it clear to the European Union that the countries want to steer the course in the same way, to stay the course towards a future that won't just benefit the citizens economically and socially, but a future that also binds the countries together as neighbors in a peaceful manner. And it is also up to you to shape your countries the way you want to assume an active role in your country's way into the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Giozo, for outlining a pretty objective context that we are facing here in this region with all the challenges ahead of us, but more importantly, with the vital role that we, young people, are playing in this process. And I bet that the majority of you have already noticed what type of framework we are following in this morning session. We started with asking the question, what kind of region do we want to live in? Then we posed one of the two viable options, European Union integration for the Western Balkan countries. But now we are probably need to ask ourselves, how do we face one of the most important challenges ahead of this path? The biggest obstacle ahead of our EU integration of the Western Balkan states is the rising level of nationalism in the respective countries. And whenever there is a challenge as dangerous as nationalism ahead of us, I always turn to people who I can trust. People I can trust I see right here in front of me, but people who I can trust I also have right here next to me. Ladies and gentlemen, as a final speaker in this morning's panel, it is an immense pleasure to introduce you to a Bulgarian diplomat and a politician with an outstanding and pretty lengthy experience in the biggest intergovernmental institution, the United Nations. I will present you to the permanent ambassador of Bulgaria at the United Nations for more than 9 years. Our next speaker is also someone who played a very important role in Bulgarian history at a very crucial episode when we were the first country to recognize the independent Republic of Macedonia. And last, but very far from least, I'll introduce you to a great friend of us, young people. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce you to His Excellency, Ambassador Stefan Tafrov.
Thank you, Dimitar, for this introduction. I feel humbled. I cannot hide the fact that I accepted this invitation from Dimitar and the organizers because I learned that I would be speaking to young people. And I think that it is very important that younger generations now in our part of Europe start thinking and acting differently. Don't commit the same mistakes my generation, previous generations have done. And also learn from the positive experience some of us have had in the past. By the way, I have no official position now, so I'm, which is unlike my German colleague, so I will be able to be more blunt because I will be speaking for myself. As you may have noticed, I've chosen for, I have entitled my speech, Nationalism is War. This is not my phrase. It is it's a famous phrase pronounced by late French President François Mitterrand in '95 during his speech, during his last speech of his presidency to the European Parliament, in January '95, when he was presenting the forthcoming priorities of the forthcoming French presidency of the European Union. And it was, in a way, his political testament to Europeans. It's a very moving speech, and it's his last passages because it's very personal. Mitterrand talks about his own experience as someone who comes from a country, he says, who has made war to every single member of this union but Denmark several times. He says, during the Second World War, I was a prisoner in Germany. In my family, Germans were, not really liked, and I've grown with, resentment against Germany. But I've been part, after the war, of this European construction, whose heart is the German French reconciliation. And he talks about it, and it is one of the best things that have happened in Europe in our history. The very possibility that great nations can now be friends in the heart of European integration. You may have seen this famous photograph of President Mitterrand and Chancellor Kohl on Verdun, where one of the battlefields of the biggest battlefields of the First World War, literally hundreds of thousands of French and German soldiers are lying. It's one of the greatest tragedies of European history, and holding hands, Kohl and Mitterrand holding hands. I have to say that, by the way, after I want to turn to the organizers. I would love to see the whole passage of the speech of Mitterrand about nationalism, translated in English. Maybe it exists in English, and somehow existing on your website or something, because it's really a testament, political testament, worth reading entirely. He's a very good writer in his own right, and his main point is nationalism is war. Be careful, because we are now Europeans, we are complacent. We have become complacent. We think that, you know, war is behind us, nationalism, we have overcome nationalism, and it may not rise again. And unfortunately, what happened afterward, what is happening now, proved him right. Nationalism is back. As the previous speaker said, nationalism is back. It is back not only in our part of the world, in the Balkans, in Southern Europe. By the way, I don't like the expression Western Balkans, though I think it's a very useful description, and for diplomats to describe you know, the region. But you know, historically, it doesn't make sense. We are the Balkans, and I'm very proud, being Bulgarian, I'm very proud member of Balkan nation, personally. Nationalism is back is not just to the Balkans and to the Southeastern Europe, but also to Europe per se. You know, we were contemplating a few months ago a French nationalist becoming president of France. Maybe in the forthcoming, unfortunately, elections in Germany, a nationalist party will become the third largest party for the first time. We entered the Bundestag, become the first largest party in Germany. Nationalism is on the rise in Hungary, in Poland, in everywhere. In Bulgaria, we also have a few nationalists and so on. It is. This is the main danger. This is really the devil to fight. Why? Because when you follow a nationalist logic, it means two things: inability to live with your neighbors, with the outside world, and inability to have peace in your own society, because most of our countries have a very diverse ethnic makeup. If you don't learn to live within your own country, with your own citizens, you are doomed to disaster. And if you follow a nationalist logic, which means we are the best, we are the victims of history, where the great powers have always been unjust to us. You know nothing about your own country, your own ethnic group has done to others. You are not taught at school about those things. Then you won't be able to live in peace with neighbors and the rest of Europe, and you won't be able to live with your own citizens. So what is the solution? The solution is, of course, European integration, and as the previous speaker said, it is a value-based community. It's based basically on this understanding that nationalism is war. By the way, I want to make a very important addition. Now we all agree, I think, that the only option for the region is the European integration, the European Union, full membership to the European but I want to make an additional point, and it has some historic reasoning. The other organization which provides stability to Europe, historically has provided stability to Europe, is of course NATO. The European integration was made possible because of the US involvement in Europe. Without the US involvement in Europe, but without NATO, which means NATO, European integration wouldn't have the political protection to develop. It was, before NATO, it was first the Marshall Plan, but then it was the Washington Treaty in '48. One of the fathers of Europe, Robert Schuman, the French foreign minister, who made the famous declaration on the 10th of December, the Day of Europe, also signed the Washington Treaty, the founding treaty of the Atlantic Alliance, So this is to tell you that one has to know history to understand the world we are living in. Without this knowledge, this understanding, future is difficult to be bright. Now, let me turn to Bulgaria, my country. It's a paradox. Bulgaria is now a member, in a way, of the European Union and NATO. And, for instance, Serbia is not. Because, of course, during communism, Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia, was a better place to live than Bulgaria. Bulgaria was more Stalinist, the regime was more oppressive, the standards of living were lower. And it is somehow, why Bulgaria is now a member of the main clubs of the West, and not, I'm random taking Serbia, because it's a neighboring country and relatively the same size. Because at some point, when the Berlin Wall fell, we made a choice not to follow first a nationalistic foreign policy, and also it held. And I can explain you from my personal point of view why it happened. In the 80s, the Bulgarian communist regime committed a horrible crime, and among many crimes he had already committed with the Bulgarian people. The communists began persecuting the Turkish minority in Bulgaria. 8% of the Bulgarian citizens are of Turkish origin. And suddenly they decided that they have to change their names from their Turkish names into Bulgarian names. Those people had to go to Turkey in big numbers, hundreds of thousands of people. It was a tragic moment, shameful moment for Bulgaria. And I entered public life protesting this, personally, and many others. We couldn't stand this being committed, this crime being committed on behalf of Bulgaria. The honor of Bulgaria was at stake. And that's why when the changes came, when the Berlin Wall fell, well, there was this opening, political opening also in Bulgarian pluralism came back, the traditional political party was restored, there was freedom of assembly, of speech, and so on. The first thing the democratic forces asked for was the restoration of the human rights of the Bulgarian Turkish minority, which we did. We obtained it at the end of the day. Secondly, Bulgaria reacquiring its independence, its full independence, because under the Soviet domination, we didn't have a foreign policy, independent foreign policy. We were completely dependent on the Soviet choices. It was very tempting, honestly, to do something about what we call in Bulgaria national ideals. And they are very legitimate, by the way. National ideas. Whole Bulgarian foreign policy of the pre-communist era was centered around reacquiring more or less the territories we had lost during the Berlin Congress, including Macedonia. And of course, it's a very, very long and very painful story, a lot of violence and so on. Instead, what Bulgaria did when Macedonia voted for independence was to prove to Macedonians that we didn't have any territorial aspirations to our neighbors. And we were the first, we made sure we were the first country in the world to recognize Macedonia as an independent state. We recognized Macedonia on the 15th of January when the European Community then recognized Slovenia and Croatia. We recognized the four republics that had asked for independence: Slovenia, Croatia, Macedonia and also Bosnia and Herzegovina. We are also the first country to have recognized Bosnia and Herzegovina as an independent country. And I think, and this was important, hopefully for them, because of course it gave some legitimacy to their choices. But also it was important for us, because it allowed us to stay away from this rise of nationalism in former Yugoslavia. Maybe because, and I speak for myself and those, we were already in the government. I was the acting Minister of Foreign Affairs at that moment. And I was only 32, it was, nothing had prepared me to, and I had the support of the President Zhelev, and the Prime Minister, Philip Dimitrov. And they told me, Stefan, we are going to, you do it, and you support whatever you propose. I had this huge responsibility to consult with different capitals to make sure Bulgaria is not isolated, and so on and so on. And I'm still very, very, very happy we did that, because I think that our message was understood. It helped the advancement of European values on the Balkans. You remember at the beginning of the 90s, the whole European press was awash of speculations there would be another Balkan war, because now Bulgaria is going to make war to Serbia, or Greece will do something, I don't know what. No, it didn't happen. It was horrible. There was, there was a lot of bloodshed, but it was not a generalized Balkan war. Bulgaria and Romania decided to go for Europe, to go for NATO. Now, current development, and talking about Macedonia and Bulgaria, I'm so happy that recently our governments reached finally an agreement over the text of a friendship good treaty, which had been negotiated for long years, an agreement couldn't be reached, which is a very strong sign of this, that yes, nationalism can be overcome. Yes, remaining questions between the two countries, and there are many of them in terms of history and so on, can be solved in a European spirit. I really hope that the Macedonian Parliament will ratify soon the treaty, the friendship treaty with Bulgaria. All political parties in Bulgaria are supporting it, so it's not a problem from a Bulgarian perspective. It would give a strong signal to the European Union and NATO that Macedonia is ready to be a member of those organizations. And Bulgaria strongly supports the aspirations of Macedonia to join both NATO and the European Union. By the way, the forthcoming Bulgarian presidency of the European Union, starting January 1st, Bulgaria will be presiding the European Union, has declared that among its priorities, the first priority for us is the enlargement of the European Union to the Western Balkans. I have to tell you that it was not, we were not exactly encouraged by the Commission and others to include this priority on our agenda, because they were saying it's not on the agenda and so on. But we did it because we think that now with the Bulgarian presidency, with the forthcoming, our presidency will be followed by an Austrian presidency, a country that strongly supports the enlargement of the European Union to the Western Balkans, though I hate this expression, and followed by a Romanian presidency, a country that also is a strong proponent of the enlargement of the European Union. So these three presidencies can work together and really make sure that this remains on the European agenda. In the meantime, and you are young people, but we in Bulgaria we figured that very tangible things could be done. Like, for instance, in the European Union, we now have legislation which doesn't allow the telephone companies to charge huge roaming fees within the European Union. We want this to be, before they accede to the European Union, to be Western Balkans to be included in this arrangement. So, you know, I cross now the border, the Bulgarian-Macedonian border. I have to pay huge fees for roaming, while if I cross the Bulgarian-Greek border, I don't pay any fees. This is not normal. This is not normal. And, you know, I see my German colleague is nodding. I hope that Germany will support this as nationally, but with the Commission. But this is feasible. These are very strong signals Europe can give to citizens of, especially young citizens of Southeastern Europe, to that, yes, they are expected to the Union. Because what is the real danger now with this rise of nationalism is that the European perspective becomes so difficult to attain that it loses its attraction. So that's why we, the European Union, we have to give constant guarantees, constant encouragements to the citizens of especially to the young citizens of Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia, and so on, Albania, Kosovo. So this is something we have to. Thank you. And now I'd like to. I think that I have spoken too long, but I think you've got my point. You young people. By the way, this organization, by the way, and I want to follow up what you said, Professor, and Mr. Gayosa said about education and teaching. And I would precise teaching of history. One of the main successes of this Franco-German reconciliation was the fact that they harmonized more or less the way they teach history in both countries. And it is something our government should do. And you should put pressure on your own government to work with other governments to allow this to happen, because we don't know about the real what really happened between our countries and our nations. We know only bits and pieces and not the whole picture. And as you said, sometimes we indulge in, especially in some countries, indulge in very extravagant historic narratives. This has to stop. Otherwise, there won't be future. Without knowledge of history, without knowledge of the complexity of Balkan history, nothing can be built. You need strong foundations to build reconciliation. And that's what you should ask your politicians for. And I want to finish with a phrase I love from a famous French philosopher and writer, Jean-Paul Sartre. During what happened in May '68 in Paris, La Sorbonne was occupied by student rebels. And he, speaking to them, he told them, be realists, ask for the impossible. Be realists, ask your politicians for the impossible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Tafrov. And indeed, the lessons of history are sometimes quite straightforward and maybe more simple than we can imagine. There is a very, very tiny gap, and the small steps sometimes are required between nationalist aspirations and hatred and giving each other's our hands and walking a joint common way towards European Union integration or any other sort of integration that we might strive for. But the other way, the vice versa way, is also possible. We should not take these European values that are the main theme of our conference, rule of law, tolerance, cooperation. This is not something that we should take for granted. Because indeed, right here, right now, right in front of me, I can see a lot of progressive, a lot of prosperous, a lot of potential young people. However, not each and every single young man and women out there has the same agenda. And it's our responsibility as young people to translate these messages that we just listen to here to those who are outside. I believe we can all do it. And, of course, now comes a very special part of our session, because it's time for some interaction. It's time for the participation of you, the most important people here at this conference. It is organized for you and because of you. It's time for you to have your chance and pose your questions to Professor Jakovina and to Ambassador Tafrov. Unfortunately, Mr. Gyoza is not here with us anymore. As you know, he has to catch a plane. But what matters is that the floor is open to your questions, so brace yourselves. Yes, over there in the back, please.
Do I need to get up? All right. My name is Goran Filic. Okay. I'm from Dallas, Texas. My parents are from former Yugoslavia. I teach at Dubrovnik International University. I teach political science. I really enjoyed both of your speeches. I do have two questions for Professor Jakovina. You talked a little bit about critical education, critical thinking. I've noticed this at the university where I teach freshmen and sophomore students. The question is on how do you implement this critical reform in terms of, is it in terms of subjects, training teachers, and at what level do you start this reform? I believe, in my opinion, it should start earlier than university, maybe even earlier than high school. So that's one question. My second question, I really liked your speech on nationalism. It looks like if I'm correct on this, European Union seems to be the sort of a beacon of hope in terms of this the European integration for the Western Balkans, so that this nationalism can sort of be avoided. However, the question is, we see rising populism in Hungary. Croatia is also a little bit of on that side, and Poland and so on. So you have nationalism in European Union with members that have been part of European Union for some time. So how is that a solution? How will that help the Western Balkans if we say that European Union is sort of aid or band-aid for nationalism? Thank you.
Croatia almost became a problem. It's less of a problem now. I'm not too happy with many developments, but it's not in the same group of countries, I would say, as Hungary and Poland, that are precisely these two countries I had in mind when I said that they are not obeying European values anymore. Plus, you have a difference between a small country like Croatia that will be put in order much easier than a large country like Poland, for instance. But that's another thing. I can maybe dwell on that. Critical thinking and reform of education. As someone who's been studying in the States, and there is a huge difference between the continental education and Anglo-Saxon education. The way how Americans or British sometimes students can ask questions about things they do not know and penetrate what's important and similar, is something that you cannot unfortunately find on the continent in general. And when I say that, I'm not talking about schools in Slavonia in Croatia. I'm talking about schools in every European country, even most developed continental European countries. That is simply so. That's different traditions. Not necessarily that all those things are different and bad, but believe me, students in Denmark are sometimes achieving, or in one of the richest countries in the world, are not as capable as students in some of the Anglo-Saxon countries, unfortunately. I think that we should change that. But it's also another story. I would be very glad to have school reform and possibility to talk about the problems of students in those countries. What we have, especially here in Southeastern Europe, are schools that are not promoting critical thinking sometimes at all. And from the Croatian example, you can see how hard it is to conduct a reform of education. Some of you might know that we have started that attempt with the reform a couple of years ago. Then we had a change of government. We had demonstrations that managed to bring 40,000 people to the main square in Croatia with no political organization behind. People were simply interested in major changes in that field. I was there. I'm personally not too optimistic that our school teachers will be capable and able of fulfilling the goals of such an ambitious reform, but I think that we should simply start. So if it is 20% at the beginning, if 20% of school teachers are capable of following what should be normal modern education for the 21st century, even that is fine. In 10 years we'll have maybe 40% of our teachers. So we should start there. If we continue like this, it will be what I said. You will have more empty cities in Southeastern Europe, and citizens that are not going to do anything, produce anything. Many countries in Eastern, or what used to be Eastern Europe, you mentioned Yugoslavia. I'm always puzzled. Yugoslavia was not, we were not thinking of ourselves as East Europeans. Eastern Europe was attached to the Soviet bloc. But what is Eastern Europe plus Yugoslavia? We hardly produce, we hardly are capable to compete. And, you cannot have nations that are only, replicating something. That is very bad. That's why we need critical thinking, and with talking about education, I'm talking about many things, actually. European values, too, that also fits.
If I may, talking about critical thinking, I talked about history, importance of... Now, young people are, as a rule, not very interested in history. They're not knowledgeable about history. This is a European phenomenon. It's, I think, a global phenomenon right now. And it has its good side, a positive side, because part of this process of overcoming nationalism is being able to forget about a few things, But at the same time, it's very dangerous, because when you are ignorant about history, you fall prey very easily to all kind of extravagant historic narratives and nationalist narratives in particular. That's why I strongly urge those of you that are, apparently very active socially and politically, to learn about history and to critically examine what you were taught at school about your own national history, to have a much broader picture, and especially to overcome this feeling, which is at the very core of every nationalism, that my nation was badly treated. We are the victims of history. This has to stop. Otherwise, because it generates resentment, it generates only negative results. This is very important. You need to develop this ability of critically examining history and your own national history and regional history at your young age. This is the answer. Oh, sorry. Yeah, you're right. No, that's why it's so dangerous, because now there is nationalism. During the 90s, somehow it was nationalism in the old members of the European Union was not on the rise. It was kind of under control. That's why the combination of those factors, it's now a pan-European phenomenon. It's not just nationalism. It's not a Balkan phenomenon. It's a phenomenon everywhere. I try to make this point. That's why it's even so important to be aware of this problem. That's why I chose the very subject of my speech, because I think that I reminded this caution of President Mitterrand, a great European, about the dangers of new nationalism, and that war cannot be entirely excluded again. Yeah.
I understand. I would like to just add to this that we shouldn't progress the idea that European Union in its own, just the fact that the European Union is a savior. I think nationalism first must be solved in this region, first, clean up your own backyard, and then you can join the European Union. If you approach European Union as an idea, let's get in, and then we will solve this idea, I believe, it's my own opinion, it's wrong. So this idea should be it should be there, but it should be canceled. It shouldn't be like, let's just, EU is our savior. That's, the problem should be solved here.
I fully agree. That's why I gave the example of the recently signed Bulgarian-Macedonian Friendship Treaty. It is a very good example of such a very successful effort in this direction between a candidate country and a member country. Of course, on the Balkans, we have to build a network of bilateral historic reconciliations, the very kind Germans and French could achieve, but not just French and Germans, Italians and Austrians, Danes and Germans, and so on. This is at the very core of the European integration. You have a network of these bilateral reconciliations, and we have to achieve that on the Balkans as well.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And now we have a question here in the front.
Hello, my name is Nikolai Iliev. First of all, I just want to say that I also think that it's very important to embrace our identity, that we are from the Balkans, and we should acknowledge that. Because I live in London for a few years, and I see many people who are ashamed of that. And, there are some reasons for that, but I don't think that this is right. I want to ask Mr. Yakovina, we started talking about history. How do we solve this problem that we all study different histories, and what are the first steps? How can we approach this problem? And one more thing, Mr. Gayoso left, but what are the main takeaways from the German-French reconciliations, and what's the most important thing that we can take from this relation in the Balkans? Thank you.
Thank you. We could take one or two more questions. We have enough time. Maybe you have the mic anyway, so please.
Okay, now it's working. Hello, my name is Helena Gandra. I'm currently living in Brussels, but I'm studying in Germany and I'm from Portugal. I wanted to ask in relation to the EU integration. In the State of the Union speech in 2017, Juncker has stated that it is clear that there will be no further enlargement during the mandate of this Commission and this Parliament. No candidate is ready yet, but thereafter the EU will be greater than 27 in number. I would like to ask both speakers, how do you think the white paper on the future of Europe and State of the Union speech can have an impact on the future of the SE region?
Thank you very much, Helena. We can take 2 or 3 brief and clearly formulated questions. Yes, please.
Hello. Yeah. Hello. I have studied political science. I come from Greece, and I'm doing my master's in European integration and governance. And I have 2 questions to both of the speakers right now. So one question is about nationalism. You both agreed that we should wait and solve nationalism before entering the EU. That's what you kind of both agreed on, I think. But if you just wait and try to solve everything before a country enters the EU, I think that's kind of unrealistic to happen, because even in Greece, when back in the 80s, before we entered the European communities, we had a socialist government and they were totally against the whole idea. So the government that entered the EU was really pro-European, and our prime minister said to the Greek people, I know that I threw you in deep water, and I know that you can't swim, but you just need to learn how to swim. And then the Greek people realized how good EU could be for them. So I think that's a better approach towards nationalism. That's my opinion. And I have a question for Mr. Iakovina, I think. You said that you're like in the same place back in like 2005 as well, so nothing is being done about textbooks, history textbooks. But isn't that like a kind of reality thing? Because you want to talk about something that happened not even like 30 years ago. It's really raw to both of the sides of the people to talk about it. So isn't like that something you saw that coming?
Pass the microphone on your left.
Can I ask? Okay. My name is Dilek. I'm from Turkey. And first of all, thank you very much for the speeches. And my first question to Mr. Iakovina. You start your session with a question like what you want from the European Union as a club. And I would like to ask this question from the other side. What European Union wants from the Turkey? Because it's continued for 60 years, so like almost 3 generations waiting for a membership. And now there is really enormous skepticism about the European Union. So how the European Union will win Turkey back or get Turkey back? This is my first question. And my second question is for Tafrov, Mr. Tafrov. And thank you very much for the insightful experience. It was really nice for me to hear. And my question is about the Bulgarian politics, because you talk about the nationalism. But right now there is interesting coalition in Bulgaria. One side has specified itself as a nationalist and patriotic, and the other side specified itself as a European party. So how we can evaluate the clash of ideology for the future of Bulgaria? Thank you very much.
Teşekkür ederim. We can take one more question.
Hello? Is this working? I can't hear myself, so. My name is Miralem. I'm coming from Bosnia and Herzegovina. I have only one question for Mr. Iakovina. since he spoke about critical education. I don't know what's the situation in Croatia, but in Bosnia we have a lot of those private universities which are not the best ones. And also in Serbia, I know, is the same situation. And my colleague from Macedonia told me, of course, in Macedonia they have a lot of private bad universities. So my question is pretty simple to you. What do you think is the future of critical education in CE countries, in states universities or in private ones? Because it's 21st century, the best universities in the world are the private one, and we are here keen to study at the states one. So if you understand my question, thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask the assistants to collect back the microphones, and now we have answer time.
Group some, and I will try to do that. Different histories. I will connect that with some of the other questions. That will always remain. There is no problem in different narratives. The problem is how you approach that. You know, if you follow the rules of historical discipline, historical science, or historiography, then there shouldn't be a problem. You know, we will never agree, and we should never agree on different things. But how you approach that, how you treat that, how you try to understand the motives of different actors at that time, that's a healthy approach to history, in my opinion. You know, a competitive victimhood, which is so characteristic for this part of Europe, you know. Who lost more people, you know, who killed more, you know, and, you know, being a national, the more nationalist you are, the happier you are with, you know, sacrifice and more blood, you know, that is feeding nationalism. That type of narrative and rewriting of history, it's in every country. I could give you so many examples from every country present in this room, you know. That is very bad. You know, but that is also not connected with normal approach, with the historical discipline. You know, critical means that you will confront different sources and that you will try to understand the motives of other groups. You know, understanding that it will never, you know, we will never be able to reach a certain, you know, so we now agree there is one textbook, you know, and that's the official quote-unquote history we follow. Official histories, totalitarian regimes, only there. You know, one narrative, undemocratic regimes. But normal approach, understanding of different, you know, motives, as I said, that is something else. Is it too early to start to write about the wars of the 90s? Would you tell me, is it maybe too early to talk about the quote-unquote fall of Istanbul or Constantinopolis? Is it too early for the Greeks and the Turks? Is it the same narrative? You know, could you in Greece find people who are extremely unanxious if we start to talk about that? Or maybe something that, or in Bulgaria, from the San Stefano and the whole idea, or Alexander the Great in Macedonia, or between Macedonia and Greece. Something took place 30 years ago, sensitive. 2 centuries ago, also sensitive. You know, because his history is not only the story about the past, it's more the story about the present time. You know, it reflects the values of societies we live in and the values of those historians. That's why you have to ask critical questions. That's why you have not look for one single narrative, because that is always a reflection of those who are in power, who want to impose one way of looking at the past. Should we solve nationalisms before joining European Union? If so, then no one will ever join European Union, because that's impossible. At the same time, do you think that Greeks have learned how to swim once they became members of the European Union? I'm also not 100% sure, you know. Yeah. So the European Union should continue to educate, I would say, or European Union, whatever will have, because once you join, that doesn't mean that you are safe, that's okay, nothing happening, you know, we can continue to have crooked politicians and bad courts and lie here and there and so on. Turkey, private universities, maybe to solve that. Croatia has managed to avoid that. Basically, we have some, but very few. In comparison with some other countries, negligible number. I know something about the quality of those things, but I'll tell you what Americans normally tell to their Fulbrighters coming to the region. Hardly any university in Southeastern Europe, and not very many in Europe in general, can compete with good or excellent American universities. Concentrate on good people. Some of the people that work at those universities are world class, even if their universities are mediocre and less than mediocre. You know, that should be maybe the message for all schools, including private and public. Public universities still, or public schools still, I would say in Croatian case, much better than all private. Turkey. And the expansion of Southeastern Europe. First of all, I think that you cannot have a whole on the European continent of those countries surrounded by the European countries. That doesn't make any sense. It's not even fair, and it's illogical. On the other hand, European Union made so many mistakes vis-à-vis Turkey, vis-à-vis Ukraine, you know, that lost case now, but also some others, you know. I think that Europe that is losing population lacked politicians with, you know, brave, large idea. Tomorrow we will, you know, Europe will, and I don't like that phrase either, you know, will remain a museum. But if we do not do something, if Europe doesn't expand to what is logical, and countries that are so nearby core of European countries, that's not going to be very good. And I think Europe or European Union will lose the battle, you know, will not continue with the standard, will not be able to keep the standard of living and remain relevant on the global level. In the meantime, though, Turkey has changed. I think that European Union made horrible mistakes 25, 30 years ago. You know, Croatia and Turkey started negotiations at the same time. So that is bad. At the same time, of course, Turkey is not just a regular country. Turkey was an empire. It's a big country with different it's different to talk about Montenegro joining and Turkey joining. That's not definitely the same, but the mistake, that was, in my opinion, horrible mistake. Instead of being kind and, you know, trying to pull Turkey more, we created this situation when Turkey changed the whole paradigm and rebranded actually the regime and the way how what Turkey was. So for the time being, I don't see that things will move very far, and I don't see the will to move things in the right direction. But at the same time, you know, you have many questions should be asked in Ankara, you know, not just, or should be addressed to people in Ankara and Turkey in general, not only Turkey, people in the European Union and in Brussels.
I start with the Greek question, and you're right. I mean, it's a very this process overcoming nationalism will continue after eventually a country from Western Balkans joins the European Union, because it's a very slow process. But you should not. You should not expect a full. Complete change before allowing a country from the Western Balkans to join the European Union, because it may lose interest. It may, as I said previously, it may become this perspective of joining, acceding to the European Union may become so distant that very destructive forces may, take shape in the country, and we may lose it. So it's a matter of very delicate balance. About what's real, the real danger now, given the state of the European integration, the European Union, is of course the impatience of the old members, the founding members, which was of course accelerated by Brexit, by the decision of the Brits to leave the European Union, is to somehow go so much further in European integration that it creates, and you mentioned the white paper of the Commission, that some of the options in this paper are not very good for acceding countries, because it might create a center and a periphery. So you have to you may join something which is of lesser importance than it used to be. You want what, and by the way, this is the position of Bulgaria as well. We want one European Union, not two, not three, not divisions between Eurozone countries and non-Eurozone countries and so on. This is very, very clear Bulgarian position. I think this should be a very clear position for the countries from southeastern Europe. Turkey, if I may, as the professor said, it's a very large country. If it were to exceed, it would be larger, with a larger population, like from several years from now, the largest population in the European Union. It's a very diverse country. And horrible mistakes were made, I agree, from both sides. Not just from the European Union side, but also from the Turkish side. You historically you had putches, you had a role of the army in your political life, which is not acceptable for a liberal democracy. Lately, Turkey faces a lot of criticism for the handling of human rights situation. For instance, arresting German citizens, it doesn't help the chances of Turkey to exceed the European Union. Or French citizens. It's not wise. Whatever you think about their crimes or whatever, honestly. I'm very pessimistic about the chances of Turkey joining the European Union. I don't see, which are bad news for Bulgaria, because we are neighbors. We have every interest to have, peaceful European Turkeys on our border. But I can't see, knowing, I have been ambassador to Italy, to France, and to UK, so I know a little bit about European politics. I can't see how France, for instance, can agree at this juncture. It was not possible already 10 years ago, honestly. So we have to work out some intermediate solution, I think. Maybe this is the realistic solution in this juncture, without entirely shutting the door for the more distant future. So some kind of close association, I think, should remain in the cards. That's my opinion. About your question about the presence of nationalist party is in Bulgaria, yes, but actually they are a minority. They're the junior partner in the coalition, and they actually, in a way, once in the government, they have lost their ability to really to voice very nationalistic ideas. In a way, the very fact they are in the government allowed the government to, for instance, to reach agreement over the Bulgarian-Macedonian treaty, for instance. It's paradoxical, but for instance, but it's not so unusual in international relations. You have sometimes breakthrough agreements, like for instance the Camp David agreement, which was when you have nationalist government, one of the parties. For instance, then in Israel you had a right-wing nationalist as prime minister, Menachem Begin, who did sign the famous Camp David agreement, and which installed peace with Egypt. So sometimes having nationalists under control in the government is in a way a smarter solution than having them outside. And last but not least, education, unfortunately, is not part of the acquis communautaire, because national states are still very jealous about their national prerogatives. I, as a very federalist-oriented pro-European, I think that with the time, the European Union should play certain role in regulating education in our country, because it would allow exactly what we are talking about, this process of strengthening critical thinking, putting more weight on what brings us together as Europeans, not what divides us. But of course, it's not going to happen soon, but this is my personal, has always been my personal opinion. I think that it should, to an extent, become a part of the acquis communautaire.
Thank you very much, Professor, Ambassador. Dear participants, we have 15 more minutes until the end of our session. You know that all good things come to an end. We have one question here in the front, and then several there at the back, and one there in the center, which is a priority one because you.
Hello. Thank you so much. This has been really interesting. And my question is, so I work a lot with students in Bulgaria, and something that we've noticed is how Bulgarian students have this very clear identity as Bulgarians, but not as Europeans. So I was wondering if you thought that developing a comprehensive European identity could be a key to solving the issue of nationalism, or rather that it could also be a danger later on. That's my question. Thank you.
No, you could have the microphone from our friend.
Thank you for letting me to ask a question. I'll just make a short introduction. This May I had the opportunity to head the session with the member of European Commission mission in Montenegro, and we touched some themes, and one of the themes was that the Commission 2 or 3 years after the joining Bulgaria and Romania stated that it was more political move than the move of fulfilling the old goals set by the European Commission. And they said that might, for Montenegro as well, regarding some issues and goals stated by the Commission, I think it's 37 or something, 35 maybe, we for sure cannot fulfill one regarding the monetary funding and currency because of our debt. And it was by the Juncker, I think Mr. Juncker 2 or 3 days ago stated that the first country from Western Balkans will be introduced in 2019, and it was speculated in the Union as well when the Brits go out, one country or maybe more from the Balkans will enter, just for example, to the others to pursue their goal. And do you think maybe that it's really sometimes in certain cases it's not about fulfilling all the goals but more keeping the peace in Balkans or in similar regions? And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah. Morning, I'm Gabriele from Italy, and I have a question, actually two questions, one per each, and they both address readiness, because we have been talking about the readiness of the Western Balkans to join the European Union, but after the Big Ben enlargement, the readiness of the European Union to absorb new members has also been a criterion for future enlargement. So from the perspective of Croatia, the country that lastly joined the European Union, would you see the Union ready in the coming decade to have new members? And talking with Mr. Ambassador about Bulgaria, which kind of enlargement do you envision for the Western Balkans? Is it the same type of enlargement that Bulgaria and Romania they took part in with the verification mechanism, which is kind of a gun from Brussels to their heads? Thank you.
Hey, I'm Matej from Slovenia. I have just one question for Mr. Ambassador. And this is a question compared to the recognition of Macedonia, because Macedonia has consisted of three parts, I believe, with Asian, Pyrenean, and Vardar part, but you recognize only the Vardar part, which was the part of Yugoslavia, and not the Pyrenean part. And I was traveling through Bulgaria recently, and the people, they don't really recognize the people of Macedonia or even the language of Macedonia. So just a state.
One more question here at the center, and then it's answer time.
Thank you. My name is Dragana, and I'm come from Belgrade. So for the past 20 minutes, we've been talking a lot about educational reform, but I'm afraid sometimes people tend to focus on the wrong things, which should be improved in that context. History has happened, and we cannot change it. But as you, Mr. Jakovina, said, we should definitely consider finding a different approach to understand it. So for example, the main source of the problems is coming from the consequences of the criminal groups' acts from the war period. My question is, don't you think that the countries that want to solve certain tension between them that happened in war period should focus to resolving crimes that caused killing and hatred, because in that way countries and people living in that countries involved in war will understand that the actual people from the countries is not guilty for everything, and that what happened is the guilt of the small criminal groups. Thank you.
So about the recognition of Macedonia by Republic of Macedonia by Bulgaria, we recognize, by the way, Bulgaria recognized the Republic of Macedonia under its constitutional name. So we don't have a name. I mean, we think that every country should be allowed to choose the name of its choosing. And by the way, one of the things that have happened to make sure Macedonia joins the European Union is, of course, the solution of the so-called name problem with Greece. And I have to say that it's very, very hard to understand the Greek position, because yeah, I know, but I know what you're going to explain, but it's very hard to understand because it has been around for such a long time, and it objectively destabilizes the region. And secondly, when you say we didn't recognize the nationhood and Bulgaria and the language, For the simple reason that there had been a referendum in what is now the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, now Republic of Macedonia, which asked that population, which of course comprises part of the historic and geographic region of Macedonia, you are right, which comprises three parts: Vardar Macedonia, which is now independent country, Republic of Macedonia; Pirin Macedonia, which is in part of Bulgaria; and Southern Macedonia, which is part of Greece. So, but only this part of Macedonia claimed statehood, and legally, under international law, you can recognize a state, but not a nation and not a language. There is nothing in international treaties that can allow you to recognize this and that. And also, it doesn't help your case because in the case of Greece, this is the main argument of Greece. Macedonians have territorial aspirations to our territory. You know, that's why we don't want this language, roughly. You know, they have aspirations to our path. You know, we are more relaxed about this. We could say the same thing. You know, oh, you have you Macedonians, you are going, which is ridiculous. I mean, of course, it will never happen. But you cannot. When talking of nationalism, everyone has to make sacrifices. You know, you cannot ask for everything. You know, for only your only point of view to be taken into account. Also, especially in such sensitive cases like territorial integrity of the country, you cannot expect any country to put in jeopardy its territorial integrity. This is not feasible. By the way, this is one of the main principles of Europe after the war. You don't change borders. That's why, for example, it's such a serious development, the annexation of Crimea by Russia, because it sets a precedent. You know, annexation. Well, Kosovo is a different story because there had been there had been mass killings, and there had been, and it was also used to be administratively. There had been, you know, a separate state time ago, so it's not the same thing. It's not the same.
Okay,
so,
please not dialogue.
Please. So it's not the same thing. It's wrong. By the way, if I were a Serb, and I have many friends in Belgrade, I would be anxious to get rid of this problem of Kosovo because it slows down the integration of Serbia into the European Union. For my regret, as a Bulgarian, it slows down. This is the reality. Of course, Kosovars should, on their side, make sure that the rights of Serbian minority in Kosovo are fully respected. That's for sure. You know, but also it slows down this is the, you know, these are the thorniest issues now in the name recognition by Greece of Macedonia, and the recognition of Kosovo by Serbia. There's some kind of solution of this problem. These are the thorniest and the most difficult issues that have to be solved. So why this treaty, Bulgaria-Macedonia, you know, designed a mechanism of talking for the two countries to talk about these very thorny issues. They're emotional. They are, you know, whatever from both sides. It has the merit to find a way to talk about these difficult things, you know. So, and it's a good compromise. So this is your question. Actually asked me, helped me to really illustrate the importance of compromise in international, especially in the Western Balkans. You can't have it all the time. You have to make sacrifices. So, am I missing something? No, I think I've covered everything. Thank you.
Please, let us respect some certain time limits and some certain code of conduct. We have a chance of a dialogue. with a Q&A. You will have a chance for more informal dialogue and a follow-up after the session has come to an end. Thank you.
That's why you need statesmen and not politicians. Someone who, we mentioned that 2 days ago at a similar panel, what Willy Brandt, for instance, did in Germany. That wasn't very easy, you know, and he was against so many odds. But, you know, and, you know, I teach Cold War history. My first lesson is on the city of Wrocław, you know, how Breslau became Wrocław. That's a very good example of what happened in Europe in 1945. And that's why European Union is very important, because Europe wasn't always a very nice place before 1945. Political reasons for, or political criteria for joining European Union. Of course it's political criteria in every single case. And of course that we will, if there is political will, that Montenegro will join in spite of some criteria not fulfilled. Take the example of Greece, for instance. All ambassadors in Athens that time knew that so things are in a very bad shape. I've been talking with Finnish ambassador in Zagreb a couple of years ago. One of his bosses was serving as Finnish ambassador in late 70s in Athens. They all knew that, you know. But there were political and it is a political, you know, there is a political logic behind all that, you know, to preserve peace, to encourage cooperation, you know, all those different things. That's why I would here say that the reasons that Turkey had military coup in 1980 wasn't really the essential stuff. You know. Bulgaria wasn't democracy until 1990. You know, there was a military coup in Greece, but now I don't know why I'm talking about Greece all the time. Spain had dictatorship until 74, and so on and so on. You know, of course, it's been politically motivated. That brings me to the answer to the answer to a colleague from Serbia. Of course, that it's not the collectives being behind, and you know, you cannot blame all nations. But some people vote for certain options, or very many people vote for certain options, and very many young people vote for certain options. So it's not just 15 people or 25 politicians we should blame. You know, it is also important to think about societies as a whole and climate in those societies, and the voices opposing certain narratives which are making things impossible or not really easy for in the future to solve stuff in the future. In 2000, Macedonian ambassador to the United States finished her tour of duty, and she got a scholarship for a year in Woodrow Wilson Center. I was there at that time in Washington. She was about to write, I don't know her name, I forgot her name. She was about to write a book on Macedonia, a success story in the Balkans. You know, all other countries had wars, and you know what was going on between 1990 and 2000, and Macedonia was simply more lucky than the others. That was 2 or 3 weeks before the first the uprising in western part of Macedonia, and that maybe it wasn't really a war, but the conflict that erupted there. Since then, and that's partially connected with the question of Macedonia, name of Macedonia. Macedonia that maybe had the potential to be a happy story, you know, ceased to be so. And that is also a responsibility of some of the neighbors, you know. Country that was approaching European Brussels in many different ways is now much further than it was, you know, 17 years ago. I could probably address some of the questions also, but maybe that could bring us to a heated debate, so I'll wind this up.
Answer the question from the gentleman from Montenegro, and I'm, my grandmother was born in Budva. Her name was Zora Rafaelovic, so I'm, I'm partial to Montenegro, but not because of this. I think that Montenegro really, which by the way already became member of NATO, it is an important element. It is a big plus for its also ambition to exceed the European Union. I think that it's highly probable that Montenegro joins the European Union during the mandate of the next Commission, because it really doesn't have major problems. It's already a member of NATO. So this is, I think, highly possible, and I think that Montenegro should seize this chance. And as far as Bulgaria is concerned, we will stand very strongly in favor of this development.
Okay, I think we are almost with a perfect timing, for which I'm very thankful both to our speakers and to you, our participants. I do realize that there's quite a wide range of topics and issues being covered and discussed in our session, which is amazing. And trying to summarize at least the most important lessons that me as a moderator could take from our group session this morning. Do not accept history in its colorful propaganda form that you might happen to experience at early years at school or at some more controversial media sources these days. Fake news, we all heard of it. Do not accept history in a propaganda form, but embrace it as a critical, objective science, because history is a science indeed. Although it's open to interpretation, there is scientific methodology throughout which you study and learn about history. And when we talk about European Union integration of the Western Balkans and of European Union membership of those countries that are yet already part of it, lest we forget that message which Professor Iacovină conveyed to us. Do we want to merely join an elitist club, or do we want to obey certain rules and stick to some values, some core values which bring us together and allow us to have this discussion, this debate? There's nothing bad about this. We should question, we should talk about all these issues, and we'll have a chance to do so later in our workshop. Now, we have a 20-minute long pause, a coffee break, and I would kindly invite you to make sure to go a bit downstairs in the lobby. There's a very beautiful photo exhibition that our lovely organizers have prepared with a lot of familiar and not so familiar faces from the previous editions. But this one is special, it's a jubilee one, and we made the perfect start to it. Thank you very much.